My father lived a beautiful life. He was magnificent. He was magic, evidenced by the outpouring of cards and letters, emails, newspaper articles, and your attendance here this evening. He also touched a family of 14 children and grew up in a farm family. And raising her own was more a matter of pragmatics, taking care of the task ahead, the feeding, the bathing, the laundering. But for my dad, who was an only child, raising his children meant an opportunity to grow up all over again. This time, of course, with playmates. And he truly did, in his way, play with us. That's the first impression I want to leave you with about the kind of person my dad was as a father. He was fun. As we went back through old photos, reminiscing about our dad, there's that story repeated over and over again when we were very young. It's told in those photographs. At Christmas, he was as excited as we were when Santa would finally arrive and leave a little pile of treasures for each of us. His deep brown eyes would sparkle with mischievous pleasure, watching us discover some unique surprise that we weren't expecting amidst our bounty. We all have memories of the funny record albums that my dad brought home for us to listen to, and he would listen to them with us over and over and over again. And we would laugh at the same jokes over and over and over again. Flip Wilson, Bill Cosby, and our favorite, Stan Freberg's America. We had so much fun listening to those albums. In the summertime, there was always a trip, a car trip. All of us crammed in the car to an adventure that he had designed and painstakingly planned. And there were the games in the car that he would play with us to keep us occupied along the way, spelling out the names of certain people through license plates, who could spot the 10 VW Beetles first, and so on. As my mother reminded us the other day when we were in the waiting room of the hospital, he was loath to stop on these car trips. No matter how long the trip, he was always fixated on getting to the destination and getting started. My siblings and I would tell you that it was good bladder control training. And it's definitely come in handy. Our trips were almost always to theme parks, Disneyland and SeaWorld, and of course Six Flags after we moved to Texas. But they were also to the Alamo, New York City, Carlsbad Caverns, among others. At each, particularly at the adventure parks, the first thing that had to occur was that my dad would ask for a map of the park, sit down on the first bench that he saw as we all begged, "Come on, let's get going," and he would plan the entire day for us. Perhaps that's the second important quality to make sure that you know about my dad as a father. He was a planner. If we were going to spend all that money to be there, then by damn, we were going to see every show there was to see, and we were going to ride every ride there was to ride. Before long, he would have the whole day sketched out, and off we would go, and we would experience every single adventure that the park had to offer. I love the photos of us in those places because I know that it's him standing on the other side of that lens, and that they are scenes of us having fun, seen through his eyes, his heart capturing us in those moments. Even without a camera to his face on trips like that, I often caught my dad looking at us that way, soaking us in, literally soaking us in with so much love. We moved around quite a bit when we kids were young. Chris and Joey and I were all born in Rhode Island, where my dad was born and raised. There, after spending a short time in the United States Air Force, my dad became a barber. He joined his French-Canadian grandfather, Pepe, who had emigrated to Rhode Island from Quebec, and eventually his own father, my grandpa, joined the barber shop as well after working most of his life in the textile factories there. News clippings saved by my grandmother from the West Warwick paper stand as evidence of the 3 generations of barbers that were my dad, my grandpa, and our Pepe. But back to the moving around a lot. Shortly after I was born, my parents divorced, and my mom moved us back to Muleshoe, Texas, where she'd lived much of her life, to live with her parents. But my dad missed us a great deal, and we were eventually to reunite as a family, moving together to El Paso when I was about 4, and where my youngest sister Jennifer was born. In El Paso, my dad first worked at Der Wiener Schnitzel. I recall so distinctly him leaving for work in that little triangular paper hat. And I recall even more distinctly the Tijuana Brass album that he brought home that was being given away as a free gift by Der Wiener Schnitzel. An album that he played over and over and over for us. And it is one of the only memories I wish my father had not ingrained in my head. My dad's first real grown-up job was with National Cash Register, where he started working when he was in his very early 30s. Applying for the job, they tried to turn him away, telling him that they didn't hire anyone without at least 2 years of college, and my dad only had a high school diploma. But he convinced them to let him take the test. He scored the highest score they'd ever had, and he got the job. And that's the third most important quality I want you to know about my dad. He was brilliant. He was truly, truly brilliant. Right up until entering the hospital a few weeks ago, my dad was still doing the New York Crossword Times daily crossword puzzle every single day to a timer. My boyfriend Will and I like to joke that we do it to a calendar. I have such wonderful memories as a young girl of my dad sitting at the dinner table with us doing homework. If we got stuck on something, he would take our book, whether it was algebra or chemistry or something else, read the material, essentially learning it for himself, and then guide us through our sticking point. He was a whiz at math, even the new math that he'd never been taught in school. And he was a master of words. But you all know that. After El Paso, NCR transferred him several times. We lived in Oklahoma City, San Diego, and Pearl River, New York, before returning to Texas when I was about 11 years old to Fort Worth. No matter where we lived, there were the games. There were so many games. From badminton to croquet, from gin rummy to cribbage, from chess to games of Risk and Monopoly, there were the games. His favorite, of course, were the strategic ones, and he loved watching us as we would develop our own strategic sensibilities. Some of you may have read the essay I did as a tribute to my dad for Father's Day in the Star-Telegram about 10 years ago, in which I talked about him in that context. Through those games, my father taught us all in the safest, most loving of environments how to learn about winning and losing, how to find and embrace a competitiveness that has contributed to our strength as the people that we were to become. And perhaps most importantly, to know that we were going to be loved, win or lose. Again, those eyes, those warm brown eyes. To be loved was to be embraced by his warm eyes. And that's the other thing I want you to know about my dad. He could literally hug you with his eyes. And of course, in the midst of all that, there was always the backdrop of my dad, the performance artist. I ran across a newly reprinted edition of my dad's high school yearbook that he had recently ordered as I went through some of his things last week. It came as no surprise to me to see that he had served as a member of his student council throughout high school, and that he was designated Best Orator by his senior class colleagues. In his belongings, gathered first by my grandmother and then later by my mother, are numerous scrapbooks of news clippings that stand as enduring testament to the many, many hours he performed in theaters throughout this country. In each city that we lived, his first mission was always to seek out the community theater and get involved. And of course, he was always cast in a leading role. There aren't too many Jerry Russells that come into community theaters. And it never took them long to see the treasure that they had on their hands. I think he did the Music Man in literally every city we ever lived in. Professor Harold Hill, and often with my brother Chris as his Winthrop. For many years, my dad worked for NCR and simultaneously pursued his love of stage work. But not long after we moved to Fort Worth, and not long after my parents divorced for the second and final time, NCR gave him an ultimatum. If he wanted to continue with them, he would have to give up acting. He agreed, and then secretly he went and performed a show in Irving. Now, I don't know how you can secretly go and perform a show. But he didn't like living his dream in the shadows. And then he did something bold. He quit his job, and he began the first real steps toward fully pursuing his passion. And that's probably the most important thing I can tell you about my dad. He was brave, and he was the most positive, optimistic human being I think I have ever known. Together, that courage and that optimism was eventually to create and lead to, of course, one of the finest professional actors' equity theaters, not just in Texas, but in the country. From the day that he quit his job at NCR, my father never had the benefit of financial resources again, but he lived a life of incredible happiness and fulfillment. He nursed the theater along, first starting it as an adjunct to his little sandwich shop that Joe referenced a moment ago, the Stage Door Deli that he opened in downtown Fort Worth, and then growing it to the treasure that it is today. I started waiting tables there at night when the sandwich shop was transformed to a pre-show dinner service when I was about 17 years old, and I waited tables there at night for around 5 years. It was hard, low-paying work, but I wouldn't have traded a second of it because I got to spend all that time with my dad again. And I was very good at making sure, because it really helped with the tips, that people knew I was Jerry's daughter. I loved that time. I got to see him do so many wonderful things there. I saw him marry Susie at Stage West. I saw their love and their relationship grow and blossom. I loved watching him through the filter at that point in time of my own loving eyes, marveling at his talent, his dedication, his refusal to give up, even when things were really tough for the theater, and there were plenty of those days. I had the pleasure of seeing him become so many different people through the characters that he played. And I learned the lesson of what it means to live your dream, even if it costs. Even if it costs a great deal to do so. My siblings and I grew up in that world of theater, that world of watching our father from our earliest of memories, bigger than life on stage. My brothers Chris and Joe both carry with them that kind of talent, each having had their own impressive stage experiences alongside my dad. My sister and I, to a lesser degree, but we too were no doubt infected with his passion. Jennifer shared his love and passion for baseball, raising her two boys as fine baseball players and competing with my dad for which was the bigger Texas Rangers fan. With me, my dad and I shared a passion for people, for justice, and later, for politics. It is fitting that the last role my dad was to play on stage was that of Clarence Darrow this past April. One of his most beloved roles. He did the show for the third time in his career. He told my brother Joe when he visited him in Tennessee not long ago that he wanted to do it one more time while he still had the mental acuity to pull it off. It is a hard, beautiful show. After my dad passed, among his things I found a letter dated April 16th, written to him by former Speaker of the House, Jim Wright, in which Speaker Wright, after seeing my dad's performance as Darrow, wrote, "For almost 2 hours, I was almost hypnotically locked into the illusion that I was actually listening to Clarence Darrow himself. When reality dawned briefly, I'd think, Jerry himself would have made a hell of a lawyer. I guess I'm glad, Jerry, that you never decided to run for Congress. I might have been out of a job." Indeed, you probably would have been out of a job, Speaker Wright. My dad could have done anything that he set his mind to. I have absolutely no doubt about that. I'll close by saying this. My dad celebrated and suffered all that it meant to be human. He was not perfect, but he was damn close. He loved many people. He loved many dogs. In fact, when we read his will right after he passed, it was my dad's expressed wish that he be cremated and that his ashes be joined with those of his most beloved dog, Ziggy, and that at some point in the future we will spread them out over the Grand Canyon. So today, my dad and Ziggy are together. Everything he loved fully, and that love was returned to him in equal measure. In the play named for Clarence Darrow, Darrow says, "If I became anything at all, I owe it to my father's patience and his books." I hope as my father repeated that line in rehearsals and in his final performances, he understood that those are the words of his very own children. If we became anything at all, we owe it to our father. He was magnificent. He was magic.